Hello and welcome to our podcast through the University of Kansas Medical Center. My name is Angela Carrasco. Joining us today, we have Dr. John Ferraro, professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Up until last year, Dr. Ferraro served as the chair of the Department of Hearing and Speech and co-director of the Intercampus Program in Communicative Disorders for 34 years. Broadly, his research interests include the study of auditory electrophysiology and the clinical applications of auditory and vestibular evoked potentials. Dr. Ferraro, thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for interviewing me.
You bet. Could you please tell us a little bit about how you became interested in the field of audiology?
Well, I was a graduate student working on my master's degree in biology at the University of Denver. I was offered a graduate research assistantship that involved quantitating the neurons of the central auditory pathways in humans. And so I was offered money to basically count nerve cells from human brain tissue, and it funded me for 3 years. I completed my master's degree in biology in the first year or so and continued on because I was accepted into the Ph.D. program of the Hearing and Speech Department at the University of Denver. So during the course of my research, I fell in love with the ear, so to speak, became an ear geek. But I was encouraged to do that and really motivated by some wonderful professors at the University of Denver who directed me into this field.
So what brought you to the University of Kansas?
Well, I had my first position after getting my graduate degree was I served as a postdoctoral fellow at Northwestern University in Chicago under the tutelage of a really very famous, well-known auditory physiologist named Peter Dallas. When I completed 2 years of postdoctoral study in Chicago and left Chicago with a wife, which I didn't get there with one, I was offered a position at Ohio State, the Ohio State University, and I was there for 7 years. And I received a call one day from my former advisor from graduate school, the University of Denver, who had left his position there and entered a job at a Swedish medical center, a medical center in Denver, where the clinical applications of some of the research I was doing began to take fold. Most of my work up until that time had been with animals, but the animal studies led to human applications. So he set up a neurodiagnostics lab, called me out of the blue, said, "We got a job for you if you're interested." There was a chance to go back home. I did. I left the university, went into a hospital setting, really transitioned my research and my career in a very different direction because I was beginning to do research now on humans and not animals, which I found more appealing for me. I was there for 2.5 years and got another call really out of the blue. I met a colleague at a convention, a conference in Florida, who asked me if I might be interested in looking at the position in Kansas City. His name was Larry Feth. He was the co-director on the Lawrence campus at that time. I said I'd never been to Kansas City, but why not? I miss the university. Mm-hmm. And the rest is history, so to speak.
And your wife was okay with that?
My wife had moved twice with them, and by then we had 2 children that we were moving. So she was a little bit reluctant. She said her harbinger of whenever I would be offered a good job is when she had a good one, and then she'd have to leave it. So I appreciated her flexibility in doing that.
Since you've been at KU, what positions have you held?
My primary positions have been chair of the Hearing and Speech Department and the co-director of the KU Intercampus Program, as you indicated in the introduction, and I held those positions for 34 years, which people keep telling me is some sort of record. But in the interim, I also served as the Associate Dean of the School of Allied Health, which is what it was called back then, the Interim Dean of the School of Allied Health, the Associate Dean of Research for the School of Allied Health and the School of Health Professions, the Interim Dean of Faculty Practice for the School of Health Professions, and the Interim Dean of the School of Health Professions. So a few positions in between there. And one of the ones especially notable in Lawrence, I was also chair of the KU Athletic Board for a few years.
You are a big fan of basketball, aren't you?
Basketball, football, pretty much all sports. But if you're at Kansas, the only one you're left with now is basketball.
At the time, yes.
Hopefully that's going to get better.
Wow. So you have been here for 34 years. Mm-hmm. You've seen the school change from Allied Health to the School of Health Professions. Mm-hmm. But what do you think was the biggest change you've seen since you came to KU?
Actually, interestingly enough, for me, the biggest changes have been primarily physical changes. The campus has grown exponentially. New buildings left and right, new buildings going up. It seems like the landscape, at least physically, is changing every day. But I've also seen the growth of our programs, the emergence of new programs, things of that nature that I think have really enhanced the educational experiences that we offer students.
It definitely looks a lot different at the Med Center campus. I can vouch for you
Very
on that.
much so.
Yes.
What used to be my parking lot is now the medical outpatient building.
Yes. We have a little bit longer walk, but we have beautiful buildings around us. What have you seen blossom the most in the field of audiology?
Oh, man, there's just several areas that I think are really exciting. Of course, I'm partial to auditory electrophysiology and how some of these diagnostic tests have improved to the point of being extremely sensitive and reliable. I think the area of cochlear implants has gone from something that people were much skeptical about to now almost every child with significant hearing loss who qualifies for one is getting them. I think they're mainstreaming into the public schools. Research in that area is extremely exciting. Research on amplification devices, hearing aids, and that has evolved to a point where when I first started off, we were fitting the patient to a hearing aid. It's fun to see us now fitting hearing aids to a patient.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things we've learned about the ear, both anatomically and physiologically, that have translated into clinical application. So it's just, there's myriad areas that have really been an exciting thing for me to watch, to evolve, and to some of them to become to be a part of.
So it sounds like you started out with a big focus in research in your early career, moved on to administration and teaching and clinical work.
Right.
So what do you love most about your job, whether it be now or in the last 34 years?
I would say all of it. I really enjoy my research. That's what got me started in this. I knew at the time I was doing animal research that I probably wouldn't necessarily be happy pursuing that basic research forever because I liked working with people.
You like the patients talking back to you?
I like patients talking back to me. I like the interaction. You're right, with patients. I like the interaction with students. Once I got to Ohio State and I began teaching, I really resonated with the students in that regard, liked being in the classroom. Basically, I have a musical background to a certain degree, and I'm somewhat of a performer. And people who like to perform like to teach. And that was a big part of it for me. And then, since my research became applicable to the clinic, we were using clinical populations to do it, it became important for me to apply that clinically as a clinician as well. So I consider myself a scientist, a clinician, a teacher, an administrator, and those things have been very rewarding for me as a career.
I can tell that. And looking at that and all the different aspects you've had in the field of education and audiology, if you could give advice to young educators who wish to pursue the field of audiology in a university setting, what advice would you give?
I tell my brand new students on the first day of class every year, make sure you really like this. You've got about 4 years to go to get a degree. If you don't like it, you're going to be miserable and you're not going to be very good. I've never known anyone who doesn't like what they do who's good at what they do. You really have to have a passion or a liking for it. And most of our students do. Sometimes they find out early into a semester, this really isn't for me, and then it really is time just to, make up your mind and say this isn't for you. But if you don't, of course, they're part of that, and I can apply to myself. I've always considered myself to be a glass half full person. I am optimistic to a certain degree. I've told my students this as well. I could have liked the heart. I could have liked the kidney.
Right.
The eye is a great organ.
Right.
But I took some courses and really enjoyed learning about and studying the ear, just by happenstance to a certain degree. And so I pursued that because I enjoyed it.
So in the field of communication sciences and disorders for an undergraduate degree, you don't find as many audiology classes. So
Right.
what would you recommend to students to find out whether they like audiology or not before they get into that Doctorate of Audiology degree program?
That's a great question, Angela. And that's really kind of a problem with our undergraduate programs in general. The courses primarily are based on numbers, and a majority of students in the undergraduate program want to be speech-language pathologists. So there are going to be many more speech-language path courses. But lately, both speech-language pathology and audiology are coming to rely more on a strong scientific background. And so I would argue that our undergraduate programs need a more extensive infusion of science, math, physics, even chemistry, sometimes biochemistry. We're treating hearing disorders at the molecular level these days. And so when students get to graduate school, and especially a strong program like ours, they should be expected to take courses that may not necessarily be typical hearing and speech path audiology courses, like genetics, like pharmacology, like biostatistics and things of that nature. I like to say that our program prepares scientific clinicians or clinically based scientists, depending on whether you want to be a clinician or a scientist.
Great. Thank you for that advice. So looking at your last 34 years, what would you say has been your greatest accomplishment or most fascinating item that has come out of your research?
Well, those are things that are all going into my book, Angela.
Oh, gosh. I'll be the first to buy that. Will you sign my book?
I would say that my proudest accomplishment has been to be involved in hiring the people that have been in our program. Both faculty and staff. I have been fortunate enough to be surrounded by brilliant, wonderful people who have made our program and given it the strength that it enjoys. I'm very proud that our program has been ranked in the top 10 consistently in both speech path and audiology. We've had wonderful faculty that contribute to that. I'm very proud of the students we've recruited. Professors also form special bonds with their doctoral students, especially their Ph.D. students, because you work very closely with them. I've had wonderful experiences with that. We have had the assistance, and I'm talking both personally and for the program, of a wonderful administrative staff, including yourself.
Thank you.
I've been very fortunate to be assisted by the individuals who have held those positions over the years. And one of the things I think I have enjoyed most, in addition to just my day job, which I've always liked, is I've gotten to see the world through my research primarily. And these are places I've been to I never thought I would ever see. And I get invited to give a talk here and there, and the next thing you know, I'm looking at the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, and I'm thinking, wow, this isn't a bad deal.
Could you highlight a few of your favorite places that you've been?
Okay. Well, let's see. My first visit to Europe was practically 30 years ago. And I gave a talk at a conference in Germany, but was able to see Paris, London, as well as Germany with a good close colleague and friend of mine, John Durant. He and I have done similar research, known each other since postdoc days. That was, the first time you experience anything and you really fall in love with it, that's a special time. But I've been to Italy, which I, of course, enjoy for personal reasons, in addition to professional ones. I have been to the Middle East, primarily because I have former students who are there working and have invited me to give talks. I've been to Asia, Japan, China. A couple of years ago, I spent 2 weeks in China, which was very interesting, giving talks around the country. It's hard to pick out a favorite. My son now and his family live in Basel, Switzerland, with his job, and they'll be there for probably another year. But I've been fortunate enough to be invited to give presentations in Warsaw, Lake Como, and at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm during the time he's there, which has allowed me to do side trips to Basel. So I've traveled all over, and I can't, if you think, what's your favorite place you've ever been? It's hard to say.
I can recall a couple times we got emails from you where
very hard to say.
You were in Brazil or somewhere, and you sent us a nice picture of what you're doing, and we're sitting behind a desk at a computer.
It was a wonderful experience to give a talk at the University of Sao Paulo School of Medicine, which is in Sao Paulo, of course, but then they allowed me to spend a couple of days in Rio de Janeiro, and my hotel was looking at Copacabana on one end and Ipanema, the beaches of Ipanema on the other.
I think those were the pictures we were receiving from you.
That's a tough gig. And I remember flying back. It was in December, and I left Rio when it was 85 degrees, and when my plane landed in Kansas City, it was 10 above. So a bit of a shock.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, with all the extensive traveling you've done, I'm sure you've met a lot of wonderful audiologists. So if you could recommend one expert in the field of audiology, aside from yourself, that students could possibly follow, who would it be and why?
Well, I look at my various mentors, and my graduate director, LeVar Best, who I think is retired now, Peter Dallas, who is the mentor of mentors, was a wonderful friend of mine. David Lim, who recently passed away. Peter's still alive, but he's retired. David Lim, an auditory anatomist, was wonderful to me at Ohio State, as was Bill Melnick. My closest colleagues now in the field are John Durant, another auditory physiologist who is recently retired. I'm talking about all these old guys. Rick Talbot is one of my best buddies. He was dean at South Alabama for a long time, but a very good audiologist. And I just go on and on and on, and I think really, and I'm really objective about this. We have some wonderful audiologists, hearing scientists on our faculty here. Tiffany Johnson, Mark Chertoff are all terrific. Mentors for students, wonderful researchers, and great teachers.
Absolutely. Well, on a personal note, you touched on this earlier, but I already knew you had a musical talent. So could you share a little bit about that?
I've played the trumpet since I was 9 years old and played in high school and whatever. And then when I got into college and graduate school, I found that I had a knack for picking it up and sitting in with bands and playing music at weddings and parties and things of that nature, and then found out even better you could make money doing it. So primarily all the time I was in graduate school, I was playing my trumpet on weekends at a place called Central City, which is above Denver now, and different places in Denver. I continued doing that when I was at Ohio State. We had bands. Even when I got back to Denver, I was playing again. I pretty much stopped doing it routinely when we moved to Kansas City, in part because I was too busy with my job, but I had just moved.
And you come to the city of jazz and then you stop playing the trumpet?
Well, you know, having a wife and 2 little kids at home tends to curtail those kinds of activities.
Sure.
And especially when I would try to sneak in maybe on a weekend morning at 6 in the morning a round of golf with my buddies. So
Let's talk about that.
A little bit too much free time.
Yeah, I know you are a lover of golf, so could you maybe tell us what the neatest course is that you've ever had the pleasure of playing?
I played Pebble Beach, which is fantastic. I've played TPC at Sawgrass. Golfers will recognize these courses. And so I've played wonderful golf courses really all over the country, even played once in Portugal.
Wow. How was the course in Portugal compared to...
Terrific.
So is it
Fabulous.
anything different than what you'd find in the U.S.?
Not really. I mean, a golf course is a golf course. Depends on how hard it is and what kind of condition it's in. And the course I played in Portugal was as a guest of a former student of mine, one of my very first audiology students who was from Portugal and has a big audiology practice there. And he invited me to give some talk. And I've been to Portugal probably more than any place over the years. And then took me out to play around a golf at his private club. So it was pretty cool.
So without cheating, what's the lowest score you've ever shot?
Well, I'm not sure I've ever shot a low score without cheating.
Honesty is more important.
My friends will attest to that. Every now and then I'll hit it. I think the best score I ever shot was a 77. But I'm normally, we like to say, 90 plus minus 5. Again, golfers will appreciate that. I'm kind of a bogey golfer. I don't get a chance to play as much as I'd like, but who does?
77 sounds impressive to me, so we'll end with that. I do want to attest to the fact that you have been a wonderful boss for the years that I've been here, and I hear so many wonderful things about you, and you've done so much for the University of Kansas. So thank you very much for joining us today and giving us a chance to ask you questions and get to know you a little bit more. We appreciate the time you took and your extensive experiences at KU. To our listeners, that was Dr. John Ferraro, professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Thank you for listening, and rock chalk.